Good afternoon, and welcome to Unity Church-unitarian, where we gather here in the sanctuary and in homes near and far for this time outside of time, made holy by our attention and by our presence. By the presence also of community gathered in person and online, and the presence of grief and loss sitting side by side with love and life. We gather to celebrate the life of Margaret Durham, or Frau Durham as her students knew her, and to mourn her death last November. Fittingly, I believe some of you are attending this service from other countries, which would have made Margaret smile, international traveler as she was. So we gratefully today recall her adventuresome spirit, her quiet ways, her gentle eyes, while also giving voice to our sorrow over her death, finding comfort in one another and giving shape to the farewell that now finally must be said. As we do, we unveil a deeper knowing that the spirit of life rings out even in the silences of death, that love's embrace is larger than life and death both, and that the seasons from which life springs circle over and over again, and that grief that we feel today in time may grow into tomorrow's hope, the breath of life and love eternally renewed as we continue on, carrying those we have loved and lost with us for the rest of our days. I light the chalice now for this sacred gathering in time, remembering Margaret's quiet and joyful presence, and the love of language and art, of music and culture, that animated her life and her teaching and led her into adventures. For these and other gifts from Margaret, we give thanks today as we light the chalice and begin our service in her memory. Please join me, rising in body or spirit, in honoring Margaret's international interests. Let us sing "This Is My Song," found in your hymnals. As we say our farewells to Margaret today, we might acknowledge that hers was a long life of 93 years, and that she was at peace as she approached her final days. I think of this poem from Emily Bronte titled "Soundless Calm." A hush of peace, a soundless calm descends, the struggle of distress and fierce impatience ends. Mute music soothes my breast, unuttered harmony that I could never dream till earth was lost to me. Then dawns the invisible. The unseen its truth reveals. My outward sense is gone. My inward essence feels. Its wings are almost free. Its home, its harbor found. Measuring the gulf, it stoops and dates the final bound. Even in the midst of calm and peace at the end of one's life, our faith does not diminish death, but rather honors its magnitude in every circumstance. A loved one, unique and never to be replaced, is now gone, and our grief is real and important as we continue living on. There is no single right way to carry grief, but we are each invited to let it teach us, to honor what we've lost and to grow into the full awareness of our inheritance, to find a sense of peace over time without trying to push our grief away. Instead, we learn to weave it and the memory of our loved ones into the fabric of our lives. And as we do, we become stronger, more compassionate, and more loving. New grief also often awakens older grief. For losses of loved ones who died recently or long ago, as well as the many losses of this pandemic time. Do not be afraid of grief's return and lingering. Find your own ways of befriending it, and it will help you carry the sorrows of this time as well as your memories of Margaret and other dear ones no longer with you. Grief can be a doorway to the continued loving presence of our ancestors, whether they are ancestors by blood or ancestors by choice, those dear ones whose lives have illuminated and blessed our own. Please join me now in a moment of silence, in tribute and in welcome to all beloved ancestors waiting on the doorsteps of your heart to be welcomed here today. And will you pray with me? Holy One, source of all being and promise of all our becoming, as we gather today to remember Margaret, help us also to remember the larger weave of all that is made with the warp and weft of life and death, of adventure and stillness, of learning and letting go. So it is that we create and discover the patterns of love and relationship, and of time and place, holding all things together. May this time we share today help us recognize the threads Margaret added to this wider and wondrous pattern, and perhaps to name which of these threads we too might integrate into our own life's weaving. May it be so, and amen. I share with you a reading from Parker Palmer. Everything falls away. It begins with these lines from a William Stafford poem. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. Sooner or later, everything falls away. You, the work you've done, your successes, large and small, your failures too. Those moments when you were light alongside the times when you became one with the night. The friends, the people you loved who loved you, those who might have wished you ill. None of this is forever. All of it is soon to go or going or long gone. Everything falls away except the thread you've followed, unknowing all along. The thread that strings together all you've been and done, the thread you didn't know you were tracking, until toward the end you see that the thread is what stays as everything else falls away. Follow that thread as far as you can, and you'll find that it does not end, but weaves into the unimaginable vastness of life. Your life never was the solo turn it seemed to be. It was always part of the great weave of nature and humanity. An immensity we come to know only as we follow our own small threads to the place where they merge with the boundless whole. Each of our threads runs its course, then joins in life together. This magnificent tapestry, this masterpiece in which we live forever. Margaret Durham, as I'm sure you know, was a quiet person. But no, by no means was she passive or timid. She embraced opportunities in work, in travel, and in recreation. As one of you, a dear friend, noted, she had a wry sense of humor, and if you waited a second or two and looked at her eyes, she was just waiting to see if you got the joke. Even in her last months in hospice, her blue eyes were bright with curiosity and interest. She was born in Detroit in 1928 to Carl and Emily Kotthaus. Her father from Germany, her mother from Switzerland. The family spoke German at home. She graduated from high school in Detroit in 1946. And when her parents divorced, her father moved to Phoenix and eventually remarried. And Margaret followed her mother to Switzerland. And when her mother became ill, Margaret cared for her in Zurich until her death. There, Margaret made a new friend, and after Margaret's mother's death, the two friends traveled well together and extensively. World War II had ended, and Margaret got a civilian job as a secretary in the U.S. Army for 2 years, posted in Japan, then in Vienna, and then Berlin. She returned to the States and stayed for a time with her father and stepmother in Phoenix. Her parents there raised dachshunds, and a woman named Viola Beatty came to purchase one of the dogs, and she and Margaret became friends. When Viola moved to Missoula, Montana, Margaret drove her there, mostly for the adventure, Margaret told me. But when they arrived in Missoula, Margaret decided to stay, and she enrolled in college there. She studied French and German, and it was there that she met Lon Durham and married him within a week of her graduation. They moved to Idaho for another year of Lon's education, and then to Bloomington, Indiana, where Lon completed his doctorate in English. Margaret earned a master's degree, and their son, Jim, was born. The family moved to the Twin Cities for Lon's job teaching English at the University of Minnesota. 9 years into their marriage, Margaret and Lon divorced. And in 1970, Margaret began teaching German at St. Paul Academy Summit School. She was a single working parent. Jim stayed with his father every other weekend. And she and Jim lived just a block away from her teaching colleague, Judy Cummins, whom Margaret drove to school each day, with Jim in the car as well. Despite the 20-year difference in the two colleagues' ages, they became friends. Judy recalls, we'd first drop Jim off at the lower school and continue to the Randolph campus. I learned so much about and from her during those rides. The best ethnic restaurants in the Twin Cities. She loved theater, particularly the smaller, more experimental ones. And she introduced us to several which we still attend today. Her passion for classical music and her love of cats. Apparently, Margaret was persuasive. Judy and her husband watched Margaret's cat one spring break, and Judy says, I did not like cats, and my husband was allergic, but I could not say no. By the end of the week, she says, we adored the cat, and shortly after, we got one of our own. At home, Margaret did all of the cooking, cleaning, and laundry for Jim and herself, creating a home that was safe and caring, although she was not quick to express emotions. The two took driving vacations to California, Arizona, Disney World in Florida. At school, Margaret's colleagues describe her as an educator who was organized, patient, and passionate about her subject and her students, often tirelessly helping students who were especially struggling. A Unity member who was once her student told me she was kind and gentle and well-loved as a teacher. She generously shared her own German heritage and traditions and encouraged her colleagues to do the same, integrating culture into their teaching of language. Which makes it no surprise that she was committed to students' travel and study opportunities abroad and reciprocal exchanges with partner schools in other countries. As one colleague put it, she wanted SPA students to become competent global citizens. Another colleague, Kathy Olson-Studler, said, Margaret was always very professional, competent, conscientious, enthusiastic, progressive, and warm and caring. She consistently held very high standards for herself and her colleagues alike. She challenged each of us in the department to always do our very best while always providing us with resources, professional opportunities, and mentoring to ensure success for everyone. Margaret had a great sense of humor and was a joyful person. She advocated for innovative and effective physical design changes in our division for the students and teachers, which we all appreciated. Another colleague noted, her pet peeves were lateness and waste. If there was a department meeting scheduled at 3, that did not mean 3:05. Most of us learned this quickly, but those who walked in late were given a Margaret look and reminded of punctuality. She was frugal, resourceful, and attentive. Her colleague Judy Cummins again says, as she walked through the halls, Margaret would notice pencils on the ground or a notebook with several empty pages. She would collect all of these and reuse them herself. It was only natural that she decided to open a bookstore during recess time where students who did not have supplies could purchase them. For 20 minutes each day during her free time in a small cubby under the stairs, she stood behind a counter and sold supplies. A lifelong learner, she was an avid reader, later becoming active in the AAUW, running its annual book sale, and also maintaining the library in her condo in retirement. In the late 1970s, when a friend of Margaret's invited her to visit Unity Church-unitarian here, Margaret told me she was grateful to find a community of other people with similar ideas and questions. She joined the church in 1976. And Jim, you've told me that you were in the church's first coming of age group. I hope it still feels a little bit like home for you. After Jim grew up, Margaret traveled even more, often with others, including her friend Peg from Detroit, who joined her on a trip to Peru and Machu Picchu. She also loved music. And her friend Joanna Lester says, over the years, I often saw her at St. Paul Chamber concerts. The summers when the Schubert Club had their summer song festivals and I worked at the Schubert Club, she was a regular, especially when German Lieder were being sung. In retirement, Margaret also began playing tennis, even winning a medal that she displayed on her wall at her last place in the Pillars. I'm told that she was still playing tennis at the St. Paul Tennis Club when COVID began. And she was still driving her car, too. Every Monday, going out to lunch with Jim. As a volunteer, she read books out loud for the Minnesota State Services for the Blind, and there she met her neighbor, Lynn Bach, who lived in the same condo building, and said, Margaret and I had been helpmates to each other, at times doing errands, groceries, paperwork, or just helping one another out. She was a good neighbor and a nice lady. At church here, she was regarded as one of those, quote, wise older women, as Laurel Lane, Unity member and pastoral care associate, puts it. Laurel says, I looked up to those women as role models to become someday. Then things changed last summer. Margaret fell and broke her clavicle in July and then fell again and broke her hip. Laurel visited her to deliver a hand-knitted comfort shawl and said, "Margaret remembered me and was happy to have visitors. Oh, how she loved the beautiful blue comfort shawl, especially because she was so cold in the TCU room." The shawl color looked great on her. And she had the blue eyes to match. I told her so, and her eyes sparkled. Pat Kelly Hall, another Unity member and pastoral care associate who visited Margaret, said she and Margaret would watch Jeopardy, and Margaret knew many of the answers. Occasionally, she would turn toward Pat with a small smile and say, "Did you get that one?" They also shared a love of language and its structure. Pat said, "We spent one afternoon talking about diagramming sentences and what the exercise revealed about how we use language. I've never met another person who took such pleasure in that." Kathy Klomoski, a friend and neighbor from her condominium, was a regular visitor and helper when Margaret moved to the Pillars. And there at the Pillars, Margaret was grateful, saying it was quiet there. She had her own furnishings around her. She often had her comfort shawl around her shoulders when we visited. She was, perhaps as much as one can be, ready for her final days. After a visit from you, Jim, with her in November, she died peacefully a few days later. I think of these words from playwright and psychologist Florida Scott Maxwell, who wrote, "You need only claim the events of your life to make yourself yours. When you truly possess all you have been and done, which may take some time, you are fierce with reality. When at last age has assembled you together, will it not be easy to let it all go, lived, balanced, over?" Margaret Durham claimed the events of her life, often quietly, but oh so competently, overcoming challenges, pursuing adventure, sharing joy. And when at last age had assembled her together, she let it all go. She lived, she balanced, it was over. Jim, may you now feel her spirit with you today and always, quietly and competently at your side, accompanying you and encouraging you. And may we each carry some part of Margaret's determination and joy, her love of learning, the sparkle in her eyes with us forevermore. May it be so. And amen. Our final hymn is "Abide with Me," and it's number 101 in your hymnals. When Margaret and I were talking as she went into hospice, I asked her what she would like us to sing at her service. And she said, "Well, you know, I grew up Lutheran." And I said, "Some of those hymns translate." And she said, "How about this one?" And she and I sang "Abide with Me" together. So let's join Margaret in singing "Abide with Me." I close today with these words from Hannah Arendt, philosopher extraordinaire, who once said this: "Death not merely ends life, it also bestows upon it a silent completeness." We have now been here today bearing witness to the silent completeness of Margaret's life. In that completeness, may we each find and receive the gifts that are ours from knowing her. And may we take those with us as threads to be woven into the remaining days of our own lives, that we might each participate in creating the patterns of love, of community, of history in which we all have a part to play. Blessed be. Rest in peace, Margaret.